All right. Hi, guys. This is Good Friday. So I wanted to come at you guys and talk to you a little bit about what Good Friday meant, what the idea behind it is. Because a lot of people don't really go to the Good Friday services that they offer in the community. We were part of it for a while, and then it seemed like people just weren't into it. Maybe they just don't have an understanding of what it is. I think they know in general, but today I wanted to break it down a little bit for you and just give you an idea of what Good Friday is. I don't think I'm going to have a Zoom meeting after this because just wasn't a lot of interest in that idea. Shoot some comments if you want to. Tell me if you do want to have Zoom meetings after these talks and stuff, because it just seemed like some people really weren't into it. Just still trying to find a way to connect, still trying to find a way to deliver the message in this weird time. So Good Friday, let's look at that. Obviously, we know it was a time that Jesus was crucified. We know it was the day they suspect through their figuring that it was this Friday that they executed Jesus, crucified him on the cross. And then his resurrection obviously happened on, it would be Easter Sunday. So if we look into that, we see that it coincides with the Jewish Passover. It's known as Holy Friday, Great Friday, or even Black Friday. Most people think of just going and buying stuff on Black Friday, but that's is probably where it came from, the idea of it. So that's kind of a beginning understanding of what it is. We trying to get down here. It's not letting me. So when you're doing things live, it kind of feels funny sometimes. But if we open up the Bible and want to read in the Gospels, we see that this was a time that the soldiers were directed by Judas Iscariot to arrest Jesus. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And we know that Judas received the 30 pieces for betraying Jesus. And we find this in Matthew 26:14 through 16, that he receives the money, betrays Jesus. And the guards tell him whoever he goes and kisses is the one that they're to arrest. So we then see that happens. He goes there, he kisses Jesus, and Jesus is taken away. He was taken to the house of Annas, the father-in-law of the high priest, Caiaphas. Well, that's, I guess, what we'll call him. He was integrated with little result, and he was bound at this time and sent to the assembly. Now, Jesus had very conflicting testimonies against him. Many witnesses that came out and were telling things about Jesus. It was conflicting, but yet Jesus sat there and said nothing. He basically was quiet during the whole time. Finally, the high priest adjourned Jesus to respond under solemn oath, saying, "I adjure you by the living God to tell us, are you the anointed one, the Son of God?" Jesus then testified, "You have said it, and in time you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Almighty, coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest then condemned Jesus for blasphemy, and the Sanhedrin concurred with the sentence of death. You find this in Matthew 26:57 through 66. And this is at the same time that Peter, waiting in the courtyard, denied Jesus 3 times. So we understand what's going on during this time. In the morning, the whole assembly brought Jesus to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, under charges of subservient the nation, opposing taxes to Caesar, and making himself a king. That's where Luke 23:1-2 tells us he made himself a king. Pilate authorized the Jewish leaders to judge Jesus according to their own law and execute sentencing. However, the Jewish leaders replied that they were not allowed by Romans to carry out a sentence of death. Pilate then questioned Jesus and told the assembly that there was no basis for sentencing. Upon learning that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate referred the case to the ruler of Galilee, King Herod, who was in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. Herod questioned Jesus but received no answer. Herod sent Jesus back to Pilate. Pilate told the assembly that neither he nor Herod found Jesus to be guilty. Pilate resolved to have Jesus whipped and released. And then we see this in Luke 23, 3 through 16. Under the guidance of the chief priests, the crowd asked for Barabbas, who had been imprisoned for committing murder during the insurrection. Pilate asked what they would have him do with Jesus. And this is where they demanded, crucify him. Pilate's wife had seen Jesus in a dream earlier that day, and she forewarned Pilate to have nothing to do with this righteous man. Pilate had Jesus flogged and then brought him out to the crowd to release him. The chief priest informed Pilate of a new charge, demanding Jesus be sentenced to death because he claimed to be God's son. This possibility filled Pilate with fear, and he brought Jesus back inside the palace and demanded to know where he came from. Coming before the crowd one last time, Pilate declared Jesus innocent and washed his hands in water and showed that he had no part in this condemnation. Nevertheless, Pilate handed Jesus over to be crucified in order to stop a riot and ultimately to keep his job. So he was basically wimping out on this. The sentence written was Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Jesus carried his cross to the site of execution, called the place of the skull, or Golgotha in Hebrew, and in Latin, Calvary. There he was crucified along with two criminals. Jesus agonized on the cross for 6 hours during his last 3 hours on the cross. From noon to 3 p.m., darkness fell over the whole land. So the last 3 hours of it, the whole land turned dark. Jesus spoke from the cross, quoting the Psalms 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? With a loud cry, Jesus gave up his spirit. There was an earthquake. Tombs broke open, and the curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom. The centurion on guard at the site of crucifixion declared, truly this was God's son. And so we have to understand now that we get what Black Friday is and we get the idea of it and stuff, that it was the time when Jesus, who they could find no fault with, who they could find nothing wrong with, Pilate washed his hands of it, Herod said he didn't want anything to do with it, still at the Jewish leaders' behest was crucified for ultimately claiming to be the Son of God. For many other reasons, but that was their final dish, was he claimed to be the Son of God. So they asked to have a murderer released over Jesus who did nothing but claim to be the Son of God. And we all take this as a solemn time. This is often on a Black Friday service where they will take and do the communion, and then they'll everybody will walk out of the room completely silent and kind of a solemn time of retrospective of what Jesus did, the pain he went through, the agonization that he had. It's a time to just be quiet. It's called Good Friday, but we reserve it as almost a Black Friday, a sad Friday, not a time for celebration. But ultimately, it is a time for celebration, because without his death and resurrection, we wouldn't have what we have today in our beliefs and our thoughts and stuff. So when you think about today, when you think about tonight, how you're going to approach the Easter season, and I know it's different because we're not getting together for the Easter moment or Easter church, and we're not coming and grouping in fellowship and in love and stuff. Take this day to really consider what Easter means to you, and bring it up a step with the study of Scripture, with the understanding of what his resurrection has done for you. And that goes a long way to, I think, helping you get through this time of isolation, get through this time of not being together, is to focus on what he really did and the joy in it. and call somebody and tell them about that joy. Instead of having invited them to church, call them and share the church service with them. Call them and share the story of it if they just want to listen to a story. Do that this Easter season. Think about it. I just wanted to give you kind of a glimpse into what Good Friday is all about, so you can look for yourself. As always, it's best to look for yourself and study for yourself and dig into it. We can only tell you so much in a limited amount of time that you haven't heard this story just go over 1,000 times. But if you actually think about it, talk about it, and feel it, then you might actually learn, grow, and have a deeper relationship with God. So I thank you that you tuned in. I thank you for listening to me ramble. I'm sorry I slur over the names and the words. The names I always have trouble with, so just disregard all of that I do as soon as I'm done with this. But take care, and I will see you on Easter morning. All right.